First question, and this is very easy. If you could just give the people your 60-second biography.
I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I was raised on the north side of Kent County. I've actually lived in the district my entire life. I was born and raised by farmers. It's actually a family trait. I've worked my way up. I'm an Afghanistan war veteran. I was infantry in the United States Army in Afghanistan. I'm actually a combat veteran as well. I built a business, sold it a few years ago. So I've worked my way up the entire way. I've been starting to tell people I was raised on a farm. I've worked fields. I've actually worked in a factory before. I've changed transmission, brakes, and everything else. So the biggest difference is the reason I'm running is to make sure that everyone is represented. That's something that's very different between myself and everybody else running, is because I actually have the full spectrum of experience of the entire district.
Okay. Second question for you. What do you think right now is the single biggest issue facing the 3rd District?
Well, we got a couple of them. The biggest thing I think it is we have very limited leadership and very little representation in Washington right now because Mr. Amash has really failed to do his job. I filed to run because he'd tell veterans, "You're not my problem, go to the VA." And everybody else decided to run after the opportunity presented itself. So you already know what they are in this race for them and nobody else. They're not in it to represent people. So representation is a big part of what we're missing in the 3rd District. We need people who are going to make sure that we can get like the missile defense system in Calhoun County. We need people to make sure that we're having fair trade deals, make sure blue collar jobs come back here. We need people who make sure our tax brackets are simpler and across the board a little bit more fair so that business owners can expand.
Okay. Next question. When you hear the phrase Black Lives Matter, what do you think of?
When I hear that phrase, the first thing I always stop to is Black Lives Matter because all lives matter across the board. This nation is very diverse. My family is mixed. My renter's family is mixed. And when I sit there and I look at this, it's about the contact of our human character. We have gotten to the point of dividing our society across the entire board, dividing who we are as Americans, instead of realizing that everybody is an American. Everybody has a concept of freedom in them. Everybody should be rated by the content of their character, what they do with their life, where we propel ourselves, and not by somebody else pointing out that we're different because of the color of our skin. So when I hear the word Black Lives Matter, I believe they matter because all lives matter across the board.
Okay. Do you believe police treat blacks and whites equally?
I believe they treat every person by the actual scenario they come up to. Police officers don't wake up in the morning and decide, "Hey, I'm going to go shoot somebody." They don't get up in the morning and say, "Hey, I'm going to go arrest an African-American, a person, a white person, an Asian person." If police officers went and did that, we have a lot of African-American, Asian, and Hispanic police in this country. That'd be like saying those guys are going out looking for white folks to arrest. So police officers wake up in the morning to go do their job. They don't wake up in the morning to say, "Hey, I'm going to go persecute somebody." They just want to go home to the family and make sure everybody's safe in their society.
Okay. Political reality, just a reality, is that congressional candidates are impacted by the top of the tickets, especially in presidential election years like we're in right now. So how closely do you align yourself with President Trump?
I do home improvement sales in this district all the time. There is no way possible that 90% of my customers are Republican. It's just not humanly possible. When I go through this district, I run into Democrats that will not answer polls honestly and have told me they are voting for President Trump because of the way the economy's gone, the fact that he fights for America. I had a Democrat just today call me on my cell phone and tell me, "I have always voted pro-union for Democrats, and in this election cycle, I'm voting Republican across the entire board." You don't hear those stories from the mainstream news media. So polling can also be manipulated because if you're always polling the same exact individuals, you're going to get the same exact results. That's where the problem is. We are still polling the same people instead of realizing, or the same sample sizes, instead of realizing that those sample sizes are shifting. That's why they couldn't protect the last election. So I am very pro-Trump. In fact, my signs say pro-life, pro-Trump. I'm not afraid of what the president's doing because if you look at it, the left-wing media is looking at this and saying, hey, we're going to go through and we're excited that the economy is collapsing. And now all of a sudden they're throwing a fit because unemployment is dropping under the COVID crisis. It's almost like they're having a meltdown because it's better than what it should be.
Okay. Next question. Would you, as is being debated right now, would you vote in principle for another direct aid COVID stimulus if you were in Congress right now?
I would not vote for the stimuluses on the table. What we need to do is, instead of just giving a handout, we need to do targeted business loans to everybody that has a business of 0% interest. We don't make it like a handout. So if you go right out of business, you still have to pay it back. So it's a risk. But 0% interest loans for 18 or 24 months. That way business owners can use their perseverance and all the hard work that they put forth in the first place to make sure that the economy is expanding. And then on the backside, we can charge an interest rate, be it 3.99% to 5.99%, somewhere in there, to make sure that it's not a full bailout. We can't afford to keep giving away money. Otherwise, we're going to have hyperinflation. Every single time we hit hyperinflation, the poor are affected the most. We need to make sure there's a balance in this economy. We need to make sure that Americans have the opportunity to succeed. So we don't need to give a hand out. We need to give a hand up. We need to make sure that the playing field is fair across the board.
Okay. In the COVID crisis here, are masks necessary and should they be mandatory in the fight against COVID-19?
You can't mandate something when people have breathing problems. That's really hard to do. The problem is Americans with Disability Act sits there and rates all of us. For instance, I just went to Harbor Freight. I can't really wear masks because I was in Afghanistan. Burn pits is a real issue that we have at the VA, and the VA wants to deny it like they did with Agent Orange. And that's just veterans for an example. But when I go into these stores, I try to wear a mask for about 5 or 6 minutes. The problem is today I was in there 10. I about passed out and had to pull the mask off, quite honestly, because you can pick me up off the ground or you can let me take it off because your oxygen level drops in your bloodstream. It's just basic science that's going on. So to require something, especially when people have medical issues, is a real problem. That's something that we have to do. The whole point of masks and quarantine is to make sure that sick people aren't getting people sick. When you have people that are relatively healthy, those are the ones that you don't have to necessarily fully quarantine. It's up to them to make an individual choice to do that.
Are you worried about asymptomatic spread, though, from people who are asymptomatic?
Well, if you look at it, we're at 0.001% of people actually died from COVID-19. If you look at the folks that actually were killed, 42% of all deaths happened in a nursing home. We all know that, right? The problem that we have is the governor chose to put sick people in nursing homes. Our governor, in my mind, should be prosecuted for manslaughter. So I'm not as concerned about asymptomatic people as I am about us not sanitizing our hands, us making sure that we're not cognitive of other people. Because as long as we're not coughing on people and kissing strangers, we should be relatively okay.
Okay. President Trump and the White House, they're currently pushing to zero out funding for COVID testing in the next round of relief bill. You're not yet in Congress, but do you support cutting funding for federal COVID testing?
I think we're through the worst of COVID. A lot of this, it's already gone through a society. There's probably a lot of people who have already had it. By the time Congress gets done doing anything and accomplishing anything, it's going to be pretty much through the rest of society slowly. So supporting more federal funding, I have a few issues with, but we are already going to have a couple tax credits on the backside that are already in there in funding. We haven't used all the testing money anyway. So to expand something we haven't used fully doesn't make sense to me. We don't need to spend money when there's money that still exists for the tests.
Okay. Couple of individual questions now. Let me find yours. Okay. In an MLive article dated June 26th, you said the Democratic Party leadership is the most racist group that you know of. Now, I don't know if that was campaign rhetoric or not, but do you think that they are more racist than the KKK?
The Democratic Party founded the KKK. Most people don't realize that. Nathan Bedford Forrest was a member of the Democratic Party. The Civil Rights Amendment back in the 1960s was fought by the Democratic Party. LBJ also sat there and said, I will have those Nners voting Democrat for 100 years. I can't find anything more racist than that. Could you?
Do you think that the party leadership right now, John Lewis, up until his death, who walked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge with Martin Luther King, they're lots of Black Americans that lead that Democratic leadership, and you think they're more racist than the KKK?
No, I think that the actual leaders of the Democratic Party are. These folks, these African Americans, aren't leaders in the party. They're not. Tell, point to me one African American right now that's in real leadership of the Democratic Party, somebody who's really in charge of it. When you go through and look at it, they spend a lot of time splitting up race, splitting up culture, trying to create these differences in there. Racism isn't just about African American. It's about Latinos. It's about Asians. It is about white. You can be African American and racist towards white people. You can be Latino and racist towards African Americans or whites. You can be Asian and you can also be racist. Racism is not to one culture. It is to any culture. That's where when I sit there and look at the Democratic Party, they point out the differences of everybody. They don't measure somebody by the content of their human character. We're all created in the image of God, period. All of us. We are all from that background. We need to stop looking at the differences of an individual and realize that everyone, every human being, can rise to something better than what they were born into. And it is up to us to decide where we are going to go in the future.
That leads to my next individualized question for you. During the debate yesterday, which I watched, you stressed the need to build relationships if you go to Washington to get anything done. So if you win, would not calling Democrats racist now, the Democratic Party leadership racist now, make it more difficult to build relationships with them when you get to Congress?
I think that there's some Democrats in there that aren't racist. I can easily work with a lot of African Americans in the Democratic Party because a lot of those folks are thinking that everybody else is racist. There's a lot of blue dog Democrats in the South I can get along with. There is a lot of Hispanic congressmen I can get along with. There's a lot of white Democrats I could get along with. We have pro-union Democrats in there that want fair trade deals for the average American worker. They exist in there. So I could easily build relationships with folks like that without a problem. The Democratic leadership is not necessarily reflective of everybody in the Democratic Party.
Okay. Last question, and this one is totally yours. We've talked about a lot, but what is one issue we haven't talked about maybe that you care about and you want to mention right now?
I have a lot of issues for that, but I think, I've brought up life, and everybody knows I'm pro-life. I've brought up border and immigration reform, but one of the biggest things is Social Security reform. It's something that a lot of people are scared of. Right now, under our Social Security system, if you die and you're 63 years old, every dollar that you paid into it is gone. The federal government essentially steals it from us and our families. What I'd like to do is real Social Security reform, not take Social Security away from the seniors that already have it, but reform the Social Security program like with what they have in Chile, where 50% of the money that you put in is inheritable to your immediate family members, your children, or whoever's still alive if you die before a certain age. That way, it stays within your family. So if you're a waitress, and let's say you die at age 62, a couple weeks before retirement, instead of all the money that you've paid in just disappearing, 50% of that would go to your children in privatized accounts, split up and divided, so that way your children continue to be taken care of and that your whole family can rise up. We need to make sure our government works for people, not to give a handout, but a hand up. That's what we need to start doing in our society. That's what's been missing across the entire board.